Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales from the Trenches. I am Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter. Matter is a healthcare technology incubator and innovation hub built on a belief that collaboration between entrepreneurs and industry leaders is the best way to develop healthcare solutions. Today's program is part of our Tales from the Trenches series, which features accomplished healthcare entrepreneurs sharing their learnings and stories and the key takeaways from their journeys. And our guest today is Sheila Mikhail, founder and CEO of AskBio. Sheila is a fascinating entrepreneur who has started and sold biotech companies to Baxter and Pfizer and Bayer. She started her own law firm, and we'll see if you agree at the end, but has arguably done as much or more to advance the promise of gene therapy than anyone other than her AskBio co-founders. I think you'll hear three themes coming through in this conversation that are particularly fascinating. One is, how do you build a biotech company with no money? Two, how do you build a biotech company if you're a woman and a minority? And three, how do you build a company when you can't adopt an existing business model? If you have questions you'd like to ask Sheila, please use the chat function of Zoom, and I will weave them into the conversation as appropriate. And if you opted into the post-event virtual networking, you'll receive an email shortly from Kay Nietzkaj with a separate Zoom link. At the conclusion of the main program, please use that link to join us for the networking. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you particularly Sheila for spending your time with us. So let's get started. You started your career as a consultant. You went to law school. You clerked for an appellate court judge. You worked for a prestigious law firm. None of that is really the typical pedigree we see when we are envisioning or talking to biotech entrepreneurs. So I want to start first with, how did you become an entrepreneur, which I believe your first foray was starting your own law firm?
Yeah, well, thank you. First and foremost, thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. I welcome very much the opportunity to tell you a few stories from my experiences, and I think what Matter does is really incredible. Entrepreneurship is a very lonely and sometimes scary road, and having groups like Matter provide support is really just invaluable. So how did I become an entrepreneur? Well, it was an unintended journey. I actually worked for another law firm. I was trained up at Ropes and Gray in Boston, and my ex-husband got recruited to Duke. And so I came to North Carolina and worked for a local law firm where I faced some hardships. And in particular, a little bit of discrimination. I was told that as a woman of color, that perhaps clients would not feel comfortable getting complex business advice from me. And so I was asked to sort of stay in the background and support other male colleagues who then would interface with clients. And of course, that was incredibly hurtful and demoralizing. And I sort of, had the opportunity to go back to my old law firm and commute long distance. But I said, well, if these folks have done this and established a successful law practice in North Carolina, then maybe I should just give it a try. And so I sort of just embarked naively. I didn't know all of the obstacles associated with starting a law firm, but decided just to go on my own and see what would happen. And it actually was a very successful venture. I was fortunate enough to have clients, big pharmaceutical companies like Bayer and GSK and Gilead, Aventis. So I built a great practice. And it also gave me the opportunity to work with smaller companies that were spinning out of local universities. And it just so happened that in the first week when I started my law practice, I was a guest lecturer. I was asked to stand in at the last minute as a guest lecturer at the University of North Carolina in a class that was being taught by Ted Zoller called Launching the Company. And the purpose of the course was to instruct professors and how to start up companies that basically developed and commercialized their technologies. sorry, I'm turning off the heater in the background. And so when I presented at that course, there was a professor, Dr. Richard Jude Samulski, who was sitting in the audience. And after I gave my little spiel, an hour-long session on how to work with the tech transfer office and how to start a C corporation, he came up to me and said, "Could you help me?" Said, "I have technology in the gene therapy area." And he mentioned to me that gene therapy was not in vogue at the time, and that it would be very difficult to get funding because there was a lot of skepticism about whether or not it was safe. But he said, "If we're successful, we will change the world." And that was almost 20 years ago. And we have been working together ever since. And so that was sort of the background of how I started in gene therapy, which was, I think, a pretty surprising way of getting into biotech. And it's been a successful venture between the two of us ever since.
Surprising indeed. I think every interesting career has these sort of serendipitous moments that occur, and they help they change the trajectory of whoever's on the journey. And in this case, you just described a couple of them. One, unfortunate situation, to say the least. But I love that your response was, "Well, screw it, I'm going to go start my own law firm," which is
Well,
fantastic.
interestingly, like, I don't know, 10 years after I started my own law practice, they called me up and asked me if I would come back and run their life sciences practice. And I was out in Arizona at the time. So I think I probably said the smartest and wittiest thing I've ever said in my life. I said, "Well, it's really hot out here, so I don't think hell has quite frozen over yet." Anyway, I'm sure, I think a lot of people of my generation have faced similar obstacles. Unfortunately, I don't think it's unique to me. I think the
Yeah.
difference is I had the opportunity to take something that was really disadvantageous and sort of turn it on its head and get a lot of opportunities from it.
And how did you, in that early, you made a decision to focus on life sciences, which you didn't have a life sciences background per se. So and I think that was a strategic decision on your part.
Yeah, so I guess I benefited a little bit from my days at the University of Chicago getting an MBA, and I remember Porter's different strategies of approaching a market, and one of them was, well, niche, right, being a niche player. So I knew that as a small law firm, it would be very difficult to compete with larger law firms. So I decided to niche in a particular area. And at the time, there weren't any law firms focusing on the life sciences area as a specialty. And in fact, we were able to get the domain name Life Sciences Law because it was such a unique concept. And it worked out well because if you specialize, then it's, the area of law that you have to have an understanding is more narrow. And so we were able to be really expert at the needs of life sciences companies, which really focuses a lot on intellectual property and licensing issues and collaboration agreements. And so, yeah, it was just an effective way of competing and positioning relative to other law firms.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you incorporated Porter's lessons into starting your law firm. And then you had another serendipitous moment, which you described, which is that Jude Samulski, Professor Samulski was in this first class. And as I understand it, so you had like just started a law firm, and he basically asked you to start a company with him, and your response was, "Sure, why start one company when you can start two?"
Well, even though if you meet Jude, it wouldn't be so surprising. He's very persuasive and incredibly likable individual. He's just an amazing individual who gives you a big vision. And he wanted to work on diseases like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which, if you know any boys who have that disease, it's incredibly devastating. Boys typically lose the ability to walk in their early teens and often face a death sentence by their mid 20s. And so, when he was talking to me about what he wanted to achieve, and he was incredibly passionate and just so giving, right? And painted this world where you could treat all these genetic diseases with a one-time treatment, and you would use a non-pathogenic virus. I mean, first of all, I was really intrigued, right? Because it really changed the way that I had thought up to that point about medicine. Uh, you know, um, I also think I was very sympathetic because I had a daughter who had a lot of health issues. And so I could relate to being a parent with a child, right? And if you have a child with health issues, I mean, you would, all the pain that your child suffers, you would take that in a second, so that you could take it away from your children. And so I could really empathize with the need, and at least my daughter's health issues were not, life-threatening the way that their issues were an absolute, there's no treatments available. So I was very sympathetic to the cause. I was intrigued by the science. And then Jude is such a likable person, it's hard to turn away from him, right? And so it was all the magic combinations, and clearly, right, almost 20 years later, I'm still involved with the company and working with Jude. So it was a magical combination from the beginning.
How did so I understand, you described why you said yes to him. Why do you think that he asked you to?
It was the last resort. There was nobody else. I mean, most people, when they take on the CEO role, they want to get paid. And gene therapy, this was right after the death of Chelsea Gelsinger in the late 1999. And so there was no funding going into the sector. I would go to different investor conferences, and investors would like run away from me like I had the plague. So, gene therapy today, there's such a renaissance in the space, and there's so much money going into the sector. But for a really long time, and in fact, AskBio, it was 17 years after the company was started when we got our first funding, there was no funding available. It was such a moonshot, and people were really concerned that it was unsafe, that you would kill, right, patients. And unfortunately, the event that shut down the field was the death of a young boy, Jesse Gelsinger, who was involved in a human clinical trial at the University of Penn at the end of 1999. But it was a different virus. It was an adenovirus. And unfortunately, the virus we use is adeno-associated virus. They're completely different viruses, but they share the same, one part of the same name. They operate differently. Ours is non-pathogenic, and adenoviruses are known to integrate in the chromosome and can cause cancer and other, bad things. And so it was just unfortunate that, there was a carryover from the death of Jesse Gelsinger into all these other areas. And it took a long time to advance the science on really like a shoestring budget, so that we could prove that the science had validity. And now today there are approved products to treat blindness, and also there's a product for spinal muscular atrophy, SMA. SMA is a death sentence for children who have it, and our technology is used in both. And people who take the SMA therapeutic basically live a pretty healthy life relative, right, to not being treated. So it's a transformative technology with really incredible results for people suffering from genetic disease, but it took us a long time to get over the barriers.
Yeah, and just for everyone who's not familiar, it's that AAV technology where Jude was really, I think, a pioneer in that.
He was the founder of the field. He was the first to clone AAV for therapeutic purposes. And he also developed the manufacturing process that most people in the industry use, that it was revolutionary. And so he really is widely known as the father of the field.
It's not a bad thing to be known for. So
Yeah. He's also a really genuinely nice guy, which is also a good thing to be known for.
So you start this company with him. You've got your law firm. You've started this thing. You're going to investor conferences, and people are running away from you, like you have, COVID, I guess, or Ebola or whatever. So and you said you I think mentioned it was 17 years before you got an injection of capital into the company. So How did you fund the company? It's not like the type of company where you can sort of grow it based on incremental revenues. It's nor is it the kind of company where you can, sit in your basement at night and code something and get something out there. Like, I'm at a gene therapy company with novel technology and 20 years ago, nonetheless. I mean, so what happened? Walk me through the 17 years
It
of,
was really hard to grow a company without money. If you're asking for the easy answer, like the recipe to do that in an easy way, I have to say there's no easy path. So what we did was we made AskBio holding company. We knew that we had to protect the IP, and today we have over 850 patents. We also knew that often venture capitalists, if they funded a company, they only gave that technology one shot on goal, right, to sort of prove itself. And if it wasn't successful, then often the technology would just be put on the shelf. And so we did not want that to happen. And so, again, our mindset was, well, there's not a lot of funding available. We don't want to take, and in fact, I think we had one term sheet for like $1 million investment on $1 million pre. So right out the door, we were losing control of the company. So we decided that what we would do is have AskBio be a holding company and then spin out the technology to these companies that we created. And then only allow a slice of the technology to go to these spin-out companies and take dilution at the newco level. And so, for example, we created a company called Therapeutics that used our platform for the development of treatments for hemophilia. And it basically was just a license, exclusive license to use the technology just for hemophilia A and B. We then got SBIR grants to advance the technology into clinical trials, and we had some collaboration agreement funding, and that got sold to Baxter. Unfortunately, Baxter became Baxalta, became Takeda, and then became Shire, and the program didn't advance quite as well as we would have liked. But the money that we got from selling the company, we then brought back to AskBio and then started another company called Bamboo. And Bamboo used our technology to develop a treatment for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Pfizer bought that in 2016, and now that drug is in pivotal clinical trials. So hopefully soon, Duchenne's boys will have a viable treatment. Today, there's no treatment available for Duchenne's that is life-sustaining. So then again, we took the money back to the holding company. So that was one way that we created revenues back to the holding company. In 2017, we finally decided that the funding environment was more attractive. So that's when we converted AskBio from an IP holding company into an operating company. And I was employee number one. Today, the company is, over 400 employees. And it's expected to be over 1,000 employees in the next 2 years. So it's been a tremendous rate of growth. We have 4 programs in the clinic, soon to be a 5th program. So it's an incredible rate of acceleration. But that was basically how we dealt with it. We also did some other things, creative funding strategies. We wrote a lot of grants, which were important, and raised a lot of money through SBIRs and academic grants and collaborations. We took our manufacturing process, which we developed on an SBIR grant, and we decided to make revenues from it. So we built a CDMO business called Biogen. We use our state-of-the-art manufacturing capabilities. It's the Pro-10 system to manufacture not only our products, but many of our competitors. And we generate significant revenues with pretty hefty profit margins from that business. We also, surprisingly, for some of our programs, the parents themselves of sick children did a lot of the heavy lifting. They made donations to advance the programs. And some of them even did things, as incredible as this may sound, bake sales and Relay for Life fundraising events. It was really a grassroots effort from parents that wanted their children to get treated. And we saw this, we got a lot of parent support in the Duchenne's community. And then for a neurological disease called giant axon neuropathy. And so it really was very humble ways of raising money. But, in particular, the parents were really committed, right? Because they had children with, devastating disease and only a specified period of time that we could treat them. The disease got too advanced, then there was no viability to our gene therapy treatments to actually stop the disease progression. And so they were racing against time, and they were highly motivated.
Funding a biotech company through bake sales is not something I ever thought I'd be talking about. So you started Chatham, I think it was 2012?
We sold it, yeah, we started around 2012 and we sold it in 2014.
So there were 10, 12, 13 years, something like that, before the Chatham sort of spin out and separate capitalization of that as a sub entity. So mostly it was grant funding. And when did you create the CDMO?
Yeah, it was mostly grant funding. And remember too, during that time, it was very difficult to advance therapeutics because the regulators were concerned. And so we actually, during that time period, took a therapeutic for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy into the clinic. Again, there were so many bars to advance a therapeutic, a gene therapy therapeutic. We had to go before a special committee called the RAC. And it really did sound like you were going to be put out in the RAC, right? Scrutinized very thoroughly, but it was Recombinant Advisory Committee. And that was in addition to the FDA review of your IND. And so there was just all these hurdles that slowed you down. And in addition, when we went finally into the clinic, the FDA would only let us inject into a muscle the therapeutic that was essentially like the size of a eraser, very small amount of virus they would let us inject. We knew that there was no treatment, right, benefit that was going to be derived from that. The FDA just wanted to make sure essentially that safety, right, that this was not going to create a massive system shutdown in the patients. And so, we really didn't, it was almost like building a bridge to nowhere other than it appeased the regulators' concern that, adeno-associated viruses were going to have the same kind of detrimental effect as adenoviruses. And clearly there was no detrimental effect. We were able to then move forward years later with a systematic delivery of our therapeutic. But it was just a different time. And, the regulators were being very cautious and time just moved very slowly. It was not necessarily so much even the funding. It was regulatory constraints, science constraints. We had to scale up manufacturing, right? There were just a lot of obstacles that got worked out during that decade. And then now you look at it and things, I think there are like 400 different AAV programs today in the clinic for a wide variety of different diseases, but it was a slow beginning.
Did the FDA's sort of reticence or hesitancy extend into the preclinical work, or did it make the preclinical models more complicated, or the work that you needed to do there more complex or more expensive as well?
Yeah, and again, I think for all of us, right, we're going into the unknown, and the FDA was being cautious because there had been a big red flag, and they wanted to make sure, especially going into children, that all of the precautions were taken. And so I don't want to sound critical of the FDA in any way, because in actuality, they were very supportive in helping us think about how to design our therapeutics and viral loads and, manufacturing processes. And I would say in the early days, right, we hadn't had as an industry all of our manufacturing as fine-tuned as today. So the product that we were making a decade ago was nothing like the purity of the product that we had today. And I think the FDA, they were tolerant within reason, but many of these programs were coming from academic centers. They weren't coming from big pharma with all of the sophistication. These were academics who were saying, let me take my research project and advance it in the clinic. And that's how the field got developed. And so the FDA really had to work with academics to get them to understand all of the systems and regulatory requirements that are necessary, right, to protect patients. So in no way do I want to sound harsh to the FDA. It was just necessary growing pains, considering this was almost like coming out of, small academic centers. It wasn't big pharma pushing through something, right? It was very unsophisticated drug developers saying, I want to get my products into the clinic. And so the field has matured a lot over the last 20 years.
So with Chatham, how were you able to get capital at that point to
No,
create another
couldn't.
company? Oh, you weren't.
Yeah, we weren't able to. So we literally leveraged a $5 million SBIR to get the technology into the clinic, and then got some good clinical data in our Factor IX program with 2 patients, and Baxter bought it at that point in time. And it was, it was a pretty attractive deal. I'm not sure if I can disclose, but it was significant enough that, we were then able to put some money back into AskBio and capitalize it, and put more resources into our Duchenne's program. When we spun out Bamboo in 2016, we thought we caught the market right, and there was enough support from the venture community that we were going to get Bamboo funded. And I was really disappointed because I had dog data out 9 years showing that we could correct the Duchenne's model of golden retrievers. And yet we couldn't get funding. But luckily, I'm a good bluffer, and I convinced Pfizer that they wanted to acquire the program before I did a deal with the venture capitalists, and so they bought the program. And good thing for patients, they're now advancing it, like I said, through pivotal trials. And I think that was probably the right thing for the drug, because Bamboo is a company of 40 patients, and the manufacturing burden for the Duchenne's drug, because you have to deliver virus to every single muscle, was very high bar. And so, Pfizer took our manufacturing process, tweaked it, and was able to get it to be even more efficient. And also, there were some complications in the clinic that Pfizer, with all of the tools and sophistication they have available to them, they were able to design around. And so the drug is moving forward. So it was bittersweet, because we really wanted to be able to get the drug ourselves over the finish line. But again, I think when you go into this business, you ultimately do it because you care about patients. And we wanted to make sure that the drug had the best chance of success, because these patients are waiting desperately.
At Matter, we're always helping companies raise money and think about investors and their strategy and the kinds of investors they want to work with. And I know with Bamboo, you had some challenges with a potential investor, which are particularly special. So why don't you describe that process and what happened?
Well, it's just clear that fundraising is not for the weak of heart, right? Can be a very difficult experience. In my particular experience in trying to raise money for Bamboo, I always compared it to being in a roller derby. I don't know if you remember that show years ago,
Sure.
right? Where people going round and round the roller rink, and they bump into each other and they hit each other to try and knock them off their skates. So it's like being in a roller derby where people have baseball bats and nobody's wearing a helmet. It's a pretty rough game. It really is. So we had gotten a term sheet from one of the big investors in the gene therapy space, like, March of, I'm trying to think, 2015. And it was very attractive. And, they said, oh, but before we finalize the deal, please go out and build a syndicate, go visit all our friends, which we did. So we talked to, a good half dozen, probably more like a dozen, but they wanted us to talk with this group and build a syndicate of about a dozen or so different investors. So we did that, and everybody was all enthusiastic. But time is going by, we're spending money, right? And the money that we had was the proceeds from Chatham, and of course, some proceeds from Duchenne's parents, who wanted to see the therapeutic go forward. They knew that we had a significant payment due. We were buying a vector core from the University of North Carolina. Vector core is just a production facility, and that payment, a very significant payment, was due on January 4th. And so in the fall, they said, well, it looks like you built the syndicate, that's great, but valuations have changed. And so now we're going to cut your pre-money valuation in half, right? And we were like, oh, this is not good. So we decided that what we would do instead, since we talked with all these venture funds, is we would go ahead and have them submit term sheets. So everybody's been in our, diligence room doing diligence on us, our data room doing diligence on us. And we're expecting, the middle of December to get all these term sheets. Well, we start getting these calls one by one from these different investors saying they weren't going to submit a term sheet. And we couldn't understand because they were all very enthusiastic. And then all of a sudden they're saying they're not submitting term sheets. So finally, we heard from one of them that the investor that asked us to create the syndicate told all of these investors that if they gave us a term sheet, they would be punished, right? Excluded from their deals for a time period or something like that. And so nobody wanted to go crosshairs with this particular investor. And so nobody was going to submit a term sheet, which was a real problem. And so I had started discussions with Pfizer at the time and basically really pushed them, right, which is a very difficult time between Christmas and New Year's, and said, well, you need to get me a term sheet right away, or else I'm going to close the round with the investors. And so they came back with a term sheet. So it's bluffing, right? And the investor hasn't totally pulled out, so it's not lying, but it's it's really positioning things the best you can. But again, I'm coming up on this January 4th deadline, and I think the investor thought I would just fold, right, and take any valuations they want. Luckily, I had a very good friend who I never asked for anything, but he has significant resources. And in a plea of desperation, I called him up and said I needed a cash infusion in the company of several $1 million, which to my surprise, he wired it overnight. And we did the paperwork later, and he made a very nice return. But he has a child with a genetic defect, so I think he could relate, and he did not want the Duchenne's drug to be put on the shelf or something bad to happen. And I think he just didn't think it was a very fair situation, so he was coming to my help. And we were able to buy the vector core, close on the deal with Pfizer. And then this investor wanted me to meet with them at JP Morgan, right? And they set up an appointment. They don't know that all this has happened in the background. And it was so funny because I basically told them, right, it's like I made the appointment and then 2 hours before I canceled because we had already done a deal. But it was so gratifying because you knew what was coming. They were just going to cram us down because they thought I was totally out of money, on the verge of bankruptcy, but yet I had sold the company. And so I think, the key lesson is always have alternatives, because a deal's not done until a deal is absolutely done. And you gotta, you can't let people know you're sweating, right? It's really the key. But that was it made me really gun shy of investors. And I've been, very sort of anxious because they're not, there's our investors that we got subsequently, TPG and Vita, which we took an investment from them in 2018, were incredible. So not all investors are, wanting to cram you down, get the best valuation, especially as founders, right? I think it can be tough. There are fair investors who want to be collaborative and equitable. And we were very fortunate that we found that with TPG and Vita. But we had some rough, and some very rough times. And I think the worst thing is, I get really upset and emotional about it because people are waiting for these drugs, right? Their kids are dying. And so you just are sort of like, I don't know, I maybe was very judgmental, but it's like, why would you take away an opportunity for people, right, to have a chance to save their kids? I mean, it's not all about dollars and cents. At the end of the day, I think you are in this space because you fundamentally want to have a big impact, right, on people's lives. And yeah, probably in some ways, I think that's the thing that drives me, keeps me going 20 years, despite all the obstacles. But it's also the thing sometimes where it gets me very frustrated, because when other people just see this as an opportunity to maximize, ROIs, you're just sort of like, really, I can't understand how you just wake up every day saying, I'm going to get another dollar today. It seems like you have to have a bigger motive. And I think, the work that we did in Bamboo and the work we do in AskBio is really the truest of purposes, right? We are advancing scientific innovation so that we can bring transformative treatments to patients with devastating disease, which today have no treatment options. So anyway, that was a very frustrating time. And to this day, I still get really mad about it because why should these people with those value sets control which technologies get advanced and which ones don't, and which CEOs, right, get advanced and don't, and what the profile of that CEO should look like? Should it be a man or a woman? Should it be Black or white? I mean, they have a lot of control at their disposal, and it just seems like you would hope that the people that have all of that power would be motivated by something more than, short-term maximization of profits. That's all.
When we started Matter, we called it Matter because we wanted to work with people who are passionate about doing something that matters. And so I can relate quite nicely to, being driven by a passion to help patients, and your frustration comes through very clearly in that with those investors.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I mean, especially like children that suffer from genetic disease, it's always been so amazing to me, and also incredibly inspiring how brave they are. I got to know quite a few of the Duchenne's patients over the years, and for many years, although it disintegrated at one point where I just couldn't even, keep it any longer. I had a note from a little boy a Duchenne's boy, who's since passed. And he said to me very early, he gave him this note, and it said, like, I know this is going to be very difficult and you probably won't have a treatment in time for me, but I'll be looking down from heaven and I know you'll help other boys behind me, right? They're just so
Gives me the
incredible.
chills.
Yeah, but it's amazing. Like, a lot of the children that I met with genetic diseases, they know they're facing life sentences, but they're incredibly brave and they're magnanimous. And the parents, right? Our investor, one of our investors who invested primarily because he had a Duchenne's boy, his boy was way too old by the time he approached us, and he knew that the therapeutic wouldn't work. But he said, Sheila, in my situation, I've been to India, I've had magic stones put over my son. I went to Mexico, we drank magical potions. We've been to other parts of the world and had mud baths, right? He said, I've done everything because I'm so desperate and I don't want other parents to be in the same place I am. I want other people to have a better outcome. So, people are so incredibly giving, right? And so unselfish that it's easy to be motivated, right? When you have people like that, it's like, oh, this is a worthwhile cause. This is something you want to devote your life to. And you wake up with the spirit of, I've got to be successful. Somehow I have to overcome these obstacles because people are counting on it. And while Bamboo wasn't able to get finance, we got the drug into the hands of a group that is advancing it, and hopefully, again, we'll bring it, to patients so they can benefit.
So by the way that you're describing everything, take us back to the first 5 to 7 years of the company when I don't think have drugs that are, they're certainly not in clinic. They're probably not even really close to that. You're you're sort of in this like, wow, this technology could really change the world, but nobody, the FDA's got a lot of questions. The investors aren't really interested. I've got a law firm that's doing really well. And like, how much, how much of your time were you spending on AskBio at that point? And what kept you going in those early years when there wasn't a lot of that? You probably weren't interacting with the Duchenne's people at that point.
Yeah, and in fact, I would say it was interesting. It was a really hard time. So it was a slow time because the science was still evolving. It wasn't baked, right? And the few attempts that people had to get it into the clinic, they failed, right? So there are other groups working on similar technologies. They went in the clinic and they failed miserably. So it was even worse. It wasn't that, and so the hurdles kept getting higher because the technology was improving. The FDA was concerned. There's a death, and then the few attempts that similar technologies, when they went in the clinic, they failed miserably, and investors lost money. So it was even worse than you could imagine. And I think at that point in time, I was working 2 full-time jobs. I was working my law firm job, and I was working in the company. So it was 2 full-time jobs. The benefit was I was an entrepreneur in each, so I had a lot of flexibility. I think it's much worse trying to start a company if you work for somebody, 40 hours a week, and then you're trying to do something on the side. I think that's really hard. But I had flexibility to be able to work both things in, if that makes sense. I just worked really long hours. I just kept doing it. I honestly believe because, my co-founder and we had this vision and we were committed to it. And we did have, in the early days, several Duchenne's parents and other parents, right, who kept rooting us on. And we knew the stories of their children. So it was almost like you couldn't quit, because if you quit, you were going to basically tell them, right, that you gave up on their children. It became very personal. So it wasn't so simple, right? Just to say, well, I'm tired of this. I haven't made any money. I'm going to go on to something else. You felt this moral obligation. And again, these were really incredible people who were so selfless, right? Unselfish. They were focused on the people that came behind them. And so I don't know, it really became more of a mission, right, than a career or a job. It just became like sort of, I was meant to do this. The hardships, we will get over them. It's just a matter of, sort of just keep chipping away. And so, yeah. And, and in the early days, everything was a win, right? If you got anything at all, if you got a little collaboration agreement with a company and they paid you, $250,000, it was a big celebration. And I remember we had gotten a collaboration agreement with a big pharmaceutical company, and they paid us $1 million up front, and it was like a major to do. It was like cloud 9. So, it was just one of those things. You didn't have high expectations, and you just kept working at it because, if you could just get through the barrier, you knew that the other side had so many incredible things to offer patients. And again, we're talking about, potentially cures, right? The gene therapy provides a one-time treatment to correct the underlying genetic defect. So if you have a genetic defect, that means you have a gene that's not working properly. We use a non-pathogenic virus to put a good gene into the body to essentially overcome the defective gene and do the work that it couldn't do. And so it truly is, I think, almost a revolution in the way we treat patients, right? Today, we really are just treating symptoms. We're not going to the molecular level and fixing the disease. So this whole concept of, if you have something wrong, we can correct it. And AskBio is one of the few companies who's taken those principles in genetic disease, and in which there are 9,000 different rare diseases that have a genetic, defect associated with them. And we're now going after pathway diseases. So today we're in the clinic in Parkinson's, and we're seeing some incredible results. And of course, Parkinson's is much more difficult to treat because could be lots of different genes and different factors contributing to the disease. But, we went into the clinic and we're getting some very promising results using gene therapy. We're in the clinic for heart failure. So we basically said, yes, we know we can treat monogenetic diseases, and we're continue to tackle many of them. But we also want to treat, diseases that affect the population more generally. And again, not a pill that you take, or an injection that you take many times a week. We're saying a one-time treatment, right? That basically resolves the problem forever in an ideal world.
Talk a little bit about what that one shot cure versus the standard business model of a therapeutic is more of an ongoing management of a chronic condition, or it's different. It's not, there hadn't been a template for this. And so you've got regulatory challenges, you've got financing challenges, but then how have the conversations gone with the payers in terms of
Yes.
reimbursing something like this, where there really wasn't a template?
So, Stephen, that's a really good question. In fact, you talk about those first 10 years where it seems like we were just in stasis, right? Not able to get as many things done as we would have liked to. During that time, we actually had negotiated a deal with a pharmaceutical company, and it was going to be a big deal. But when we sat down with the business development person, and they were trying to figure out the appropriate value, right, of the deal, he kept asking me, how often does the patient get treated? And I said, once. And he goes, oh, once a day? And I go, no, once a week? No, once. He goes, once a month? And I go, no, it's a one-time treatment. Hopefully, right, with one-time treatment, it's a cure. The patient won't have to be retreated. And he came back to me and he said, well, we can't work that into our model because our model is expecting a recurring revenue stream. And so the deal cratered, unfortunately. We had buy-in from the scientists, we had buy-in from, the strategic component of the company, but we couldn't get the business case because nobody could understand how the payers would pay for this, right? A one-time treatment. And I think that was the other obstacle, unfortunately, for the advancement of gene therapy in the early days. People wanted those recurring revenue streams, right? It was almost like, I hate to say it, but almost like an addict, right? They wanted you to keep taking the pills or the injections, and in one-time treatment, there was a concern that, payers and insurance companies wouldn't pay high enough of a price to offset the revenue streams from a more recurring treatment. And in fact, the product that I just mentioned that we couldn't get the deal for would have cannibalized that company's ongoing, right? They had a product that you injected in patients several times a week, and we would have displaced that. And so that wasn't in their interest to do that. And so I think it was only after, and we have Dr. Kathy High, who's part of our company now. She was the co-founder of Spark. When she was at Spark, she got the first FDA-approved drug on the market for in the U.S. for AAV gene therapies like Sterna for inherited blindness. And she overcame a lot of these obstacles and had to meet with the payers and the insurance companies. And then after that, the drug for SMA by Avexis, now Novartis, got approved. These drugs have high prices associated with them, and sometimes I really don't like that because I want our drugs, right, to go to as many patients as necessary. So I want them to be affordable and accessible, and I spend a lot of time trying to drive down the cost of goods and thinking about different formulations so they can be shipped all over the world. Without worrying about cold storage supply issues. There you go. And so anyway, but it's necessary because without those higher prices, I don't think you would see as much money and innovation in the sector. Today, you see a lot of money going into it because there is a path for payers and insurance companies to reimburse, right, the price of gene therapy drugs. at a level that is appropriate or adequate from a investor's perspective, return on investment made. So yeah, that all had to be worked out, and then it took a while. It took a while for everything to sort of settle.
How do you think being a Hispanic woman has affected your career since you talked about the one, particularly egregious, like very overt moment with the law firm? But how do you think it's affected your career since? And do you have any advice for women or minorities who are either in or aspiring to be in leadership positions in life sciences?
Yeah, I mean, I look at my company. I think it's extremely beneficial because my company looks like, you know, almost the United Nations. We have people from every place around the world, right? And I love it. It's a very diverse group of people from representing lots of different nationalities, religions, sexual orientations, right? It's wonderful. I love it. And I embrace every aspect of that, right? Diversity is a really big issue here at AskBio. And, I look at the senior management ranks, we're over, 57%, close to 60% women in leadership positions. And when you look at the company overall, in Europe, our manufacturing facility, most people can't believe this. We're approaching 280 people there. We're growing, basically tripling per year our growth, 75% women, right? So when I add those into the statistics, they're even more advantageous to women. So we don't, I think we don't have, I hope, a lot of issues that maybe companies that are less diverse have. And I think that there are huge strategic advantages to being a diverse company and celebrating, right, that diversity. If nothing else, we have a lot of fun. We celebrate everything here. And I think it just makes the environment, employee engagement much higher. But I think in general, look, if you just look at the number of companies that are venture-backed, that are run by women CEOs, it's not a very high number. I think I saw it's like 5 to 7%. It's not high at all. And then when you look at companies where the CEO comes from an underrepresented background, it's less than 3%. So the statistics are not in your favor. And I think, my personal experience was it's hard sometimes to get the credibility. A lot of times my statements, I would say something and then they would often be attributed to like a male counterpart. And I saw that happen a lot. But I think, we just have to be persistent as a group, and we have to demonstrate our capabilities. And those of us who get the opportunity, right, have to bring others along. It's just that simple. So I try to, help other women entrepreneurs, other people of color through, basically mentorship. I've been involved in a lot of formal programs, informal programs, sponsoring diversity initiatives, both in the company and more broadly. And so there's a burden on the very few lucky ones of us who have gotten opportunities, right? And we just have to make sure we provide other opportunities to the extent we can, right, to others similarly situated. But it's not easy. And my word of advice would be, you got to be really tough, and you can't care what people think about you, because a lot of times when you're successful and you're a woman or you're an underrepresented individual, I think people always tend to, they tend to think, oh, maybe you didn't work as hard, or you got some breaks, or there's a lot of crap that's thrown at you, right? And women always, if you are tough and sort of very focused, I think sometimes you get a lot of sexist ideas thrown at you too. But yes, you actually do work 10 times harder. I'm looking at somebody's gone 10 times harder and longer and smarter and everything else. It's not easy. And I wish I could say it's an even playing field, but I don't think it is today. And hopefully, for our children, it will be different. But I think today, for those of us, right, who are trying to be trailblazers, it's hard. But we're trying to make it easier for the people coming behind.
So on a lighter note, who does the naming of your technologies and your companies? You've got Bamboo and Chatham, and AskBio is after the god of medicine. And most interestingly, I thought one of your technologies is called like doggy bone something. Like, who does that?
It looks like a doggy bone. It's sort of like it's always been Jude and me at various points in time coming up with things, and I think there's no there's never been any pattern or any logic. It's just sort of what we're thinking about at the time. Bamboo, for example, was named because his grandson saw a kangaroo on TV on a cartoon. He kept saying bamboo, bamboo, and Jude goes, that sounds like a good name. And then he comes back to me with this, right? And I have to figure out a logic behind it. So I go, well, bamboo is like a weed, right? It grows fast and it's really resilient. So, it makes sense, right? And it's good luck. So now, unfortunately, when Pfizer bought us, they called it Project Panda. And panda bears eat bamboo, right? So we were like, oh, this might not be a good thing. But otherwise, Asklepios is so the company's official name is Asklepios BioPharmaceuticals. I could never get the hat over the E because it's Greek and you have to put this little hat thing on. I couldn't figure out how to do that on my computer, so we shortened it to AskBio. But Asklepios, of course, is the Greek god of medicine that cures incurable diseases. So it was very fitting. Jude, flips from being very, sort of flippant about things when his grandson named Bamboo to very thoughtful when he named Asklepios. And other times, I really don't know. We'll just be thinking about something and we'll come up with a name. Not always a lot of logic to it.
Well, Sheila, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, with our community. It is truly remarkable. And really, there's so much that I know you must be so proud of that you've accomplished over the last 20 years in advancing a field of gene therapy that, as you so kind of eloquently described, holds really just tremendous potential for addressing some of the most intractable diseases that we face as a species. Thank you to all of the rest of you for spending part of your day with us. We have our final program as Matter of the Year on Thursday as part of our Healthcare 2040 series. We'll have leaders from Brain Lab, Hillrom, and Parkview Health talking about innovation in operating rooms. You can register for that at matter.health/events. I hope to see you there. I hope, Sheila, that you and everyone else who's listening enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Stephen, so much for letting me be part of this. And, happy holidays to everybody, right? And a joyous new year.
Thanks, everyone.